Hello students, I am Dr. Saliha Jamal from Department of Geography, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. So I am here with the course Climate Change Vulnerability and Adaptation, and today's topic of discussion is Projected Climate Change and the IPCC. So let us start the class. Welcome you all to the class. When we talk about the projected climate change, then it means we are talking about the what will be the future of this climate change, which is continuing consistently. And when it comes to the term IPCC, actually it is one of the primary worldwide organization which evaluates the climate change science. What are the changes? Mainly the physical changes that are taking place regarding the climate. It also finds out the level of greenhouse emission. It also predicts the future of the greenhouse emissions, and it is generally abbreviated as IPCC, whose full form is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So basically it is an organization which evaluates the climate change that is taking place in the past, now, and that will take place in the future. Through all analyzing these aspects of climate science, it publishes various assessment reports which generally summarizes the most recent findings in the science of the climate change, like the effects of the climate change, we can say, the possible mitigation techniques regarding the climate change, and these reports are generally published after every few years, mostly 6 to 7 years, and these reports are regarded as very important sources of information which helps the policy makers, the decision makers everywhere, especially if we talk about the conference of parties, COPs. About the COPs we will talk further in our next lecture that will be upcoming in I think 1 or 2 days. So here just I wanted to say that whatever the assessment that comes through the report through the IPCC, it serves as the important information for the policy makers, for the decision makers to take smart decisions about the mitigation, adaptation of the climate change. Let us talk about its origin. If we talk about IPCC, that is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it was established in 1988 by United Nations Environment Program, that is UNEP, and World Meteorological Organization, WMO. Means UNEP and WMO, those have established this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 1988, which produces the comprehensive assessment of reports, what I have said, for every few years, around about 6 to 7 years, and these report actually synthesizes the latest climate science. And if we assess these reports includes various findings, mainly the findings related to the physical science of the climate change, means what type of physical characteristics of the climate that have changed through time and its prediction regarding the future. It also includes the various impacts of the climate change, maybe in terms of the extreme weather impacts, or we can say it also includes the adaptation strategies, because the rate at which the climate change is going on consistently, if this rate continues, what will be the impact, what should be the adaptation strategies in order to mitigate with this climate change. These all things is generally assessed and published by the IPCC, and it works through the several working groups which focuses on the different aspects. For example, let us talk about here the 3 working groups. If we see the working group 1, mainly it focuses on the physical science basis of the climate. When we talk about the physical science of climate change, it means the physical characteristics of the climate we are talking about, maybe in the terms of temperature changes, precipitation changes, etc. Similarly, working group to assesses different aspects. The aspect regarding to the impacts of the climate change, maybe in the sea level rise, global temperature rise, or we can say increase in the events, extreme weather events. This working group 2 also focuses on the vulnerability, that is the susceptibility of various regions, nations and the communities, and even it also focuses on the adaptation strategies, how the different nation and different communities will adapt to the climate change. Working group 3 that mainly focuses on the mitigation strategies. When we talk about students mitigation strategies, that means through certain techniques and steps we are going to manage and reduce the negative impacts of the climate change. Mainly through the reduction in the greenhouse emission is one of the major example. So here you can see that different working groups of the IPCC that focuses on the different aspects of the climate change, maybe the physical characteristics of the climate change, regarding the impacts, vulnerability and adaptation strategies of the climate change, and also the mitigation strategies of the climate change. This IPCC also releases various special reports. Here you can give example of a special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade in 2018, which highlights the importance of warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade in order to avoid the worst impacts of the climate change. Actually, IPCC publishes every scenario that if the 1.5 degree centigrade increase will take place, what will be the impact, and if it is more than that, up to 2 degrees centigrade, 2 to 3 degrees centigrade, what will be the impact, and even it may reach up to 4 degrees centigrade, then what will be the impact. So it releases various special reports, that mainly in the name of special report on the global warming, having different scenarios regarding the temperature rise. How these findings generally helps the different organizations, policymakers and the decision makers. Generally, the reports, the assessments which is published by this intergovernmental panel on climate change are very much important for informing the policymakers, different nations, for taking certain climate action, and it also help in raising the public awareness that what is the emergency and urgency of addressing the climate change. Through the data, through the predictions that is generally made by the IPCC, through the findings of the IPCC, these policymakers can be greatly helped out in order to take a smart decision regarding the climate action, and it also helped to create awareness among the people regarding addressing the climate change. It also serves the scientific basis for international climate negotiation and the agreements. We may talk about COP's Conference of Parties, and we may also talk about the Paris Agreement. So these all organizations, even they also use the assessments that is made by the IPCC. Let us talk about some of the key highlights of IPCC, on which sections of the climate change it works. Talking about the key highlight, the first thing comes here about the temperature rise. Actually, the IPCC predicts without any significant reductions, if the greenhouse emission continues, then the average global temperature would probably it will rise up to 1.5 degrees centigrade if we compare it from the pre-industrial levels, and it will reach up to 1.5 degrees centigrade up to 2030 and 2052. Means this global rise will take place if the climate change is continuing, if the, we can say, greenhouse gas emission is continuing at same pace without any significant reduction, then there will be the rise of 1.5 centigrade. Under the high emission scenario, let us talk about how the IPCC assesses. Under high emission scenarios, means when the greenhouse gases emission rises, the warming will also rise, and it will rise up to 2 degrees centigrade by the middle of this century, and even it can rise up to 4 degrees centigrade by 2100, which is a matter of great concern. If we see to its second key highlight, IPCC also assesses the sea level rise. According to IPCC, by 2100, sea levels are expected to rise by zero point 0.6 to 1 meter worldwide, mainly in the high emission scenario. The main cause is thermal expansion, means due to the rise of temperature, the water molecules generally expands, which leads to the thermal expansion of this mainly the oceans, and also the melting of ice sheets in the Greenland and Antarctica, that also leads to sea level rise. After 2100, there may be a notable increase of for centuries to come if the same pace is continuing. IPCC also assesses that there will be increase in the severity and intensity and in the numbers of the heat wave if the climate change continues with the same pace. Talking about another aspect like extreme weather events of hurricanes and storms, it says that the flooding, drought situation that will deteriorate, that will hamper the infrastructure, the human health, and even the agriculture. These all sectors will be greatly impacted by the occurrence of flooding and the droughts. IPCC also talks about the ocean acidification. We know that oceans are becoming more acidic in nature because of increased in the carbon dioxide emission. Through this, the marine ecosystem is specifically impacted, mainly the coral reefs, shellfish, and the planktons, which are essential to the carbon cycle and global food chains. They get immensely harmed. IPCC also talks about the impact on the ecosystems and the biodiversity. We know due to the rise in temperature, means changing pattern of temperature, changing pattern of the precipitation, and even increase in the extreme weather events, these all things leads to the habitat loss. Even it leads to the, if the habitat is lost, there will be the biodiversity loss. These temperature shifts and the precipitation shifts will overall, it will disturb several ecosystems, and that will put several species at increased risk of extinction. Mostly the coastal regions are greatly affected. For example, if we talk about the coral reef, it is affected by the acidification process. It is affected by the we can say global rise in temperature. The coral polyps, which are the building initials for the coral reefs, they are greatly impacted because of rise in temperature and acidification. They expel out their algae, that is known as zooxanthellae, that provide food, nutrition to this coral polyps. When they are expelled out from the coral polyps, these coral polyps, they turn white in color and coral bleaching takes place, which are more vulnerable to the climatic changes. So mainly the coral reefs are greatly affected. The Arctic ecosystem is also at very much risk. So overall, we can say it talks about, the IPCC talks about the several aspects of the climate change. Like if we analyze how it analyzes the socioeconomic and human impacts, the IPCC analyzes the security of the food, because we know due to the change of temperature, precipitation regime, which somewhere there is flood situation, somewhere I can say there is a drought situation, that will impact the food production, that will disrupt the food production. There will be low crop yield, and even in some region the famine situation may appear. It also talks about the water availability. We know some areas, especially those rely on the seasonal snowpack or monsoon rains, they are greatly affected by the climate change and may experience water scarcity. because the glacial melt generally takes place before or after the season in which it is particularly required by the community living in those areas. Many times it also occurs due to the changing pattern of the precipitation and the snowfall. Climate change also leads to the migration and displacement. There are various reasons for that. Maybe due to the resource scarcity. Many times millions of people may be displaced by the climate related calamities like sea level rise and gradual changes in temperature. These all aspects may lead to the huge migration and displacement of people from one region to another. Even the IPCC talks about the feedback loop mechanism. Many times I have explained. Here I am going to give example about the hazardous feedback loop that is mainly exacerbated, that mainly aggravates the warming by releasing large volume of methane, a powerful greenhouse gas. Means we know climate change is consistently continuing, through which global warming is being experienced. Through this global warming, release of large volume of methane, which is regarded as a powerful greenhouse gas, that is released due to the permafrost thawing, due to the melting of the permafrost. Then again this released, we can say, this methane which is again released in the atmosphere, then it again lead to the more warming, or we can say more increase in the temperature. So it creates a sort of feedback loop. About this situation also IPCC talks about. So what I have explained here, I explained here few of the key highlights of the IPCCs on which the reports of the IPCCs are dependent. For example, here we talked about the temperature rise, sea level rise, increased heat wave intensity. We have talked about more powerful hurricanes and storms, ocean acidification, impact on ecosystem and diversity, socioeconomic and human impact, migration and displacement, feedback loops. All these aspects are the major key highlights of the IPCC. We know how this IPCC manages all these scenarios. It manages all these scenarios through the several pathways. It examines the multiple future climate scenarios, mainly in terms of the greenhouse emission. It generally predicts the future climate scenarios, and this prediction is mainly based on the greenhouse emissions and the societal development. For this, it uses various representative concentration pathways, which is known as RCPCs, and shared socioeconomic pathways, which is known as SSPs. If we talk about representative concentration pathways, that is RPCCs, it actually focuses on the scenarios that project, that interpolate the future of greenhouse gas concentration and radiative factors. Mainly it concentrates on the future of the greenhouse gas concentration. Talking about shared socioeconomic pathways, that is SSPs, it generally focuses on the situation that describes the possible future socioeconomic development for the world up to 2100. So IPCCs generally work through the pathways like representative concentration pathways, RCPs, and shared socioeconomic pathways, SSPs. Let us talk about few of the RCPs. If you analyze here, RCP 2.6, it generally finds out this situation, a scenario where the minimal emissions will take place. Means whatever emissions that is we are having today, if that emission remains and continues, in which warming is predicted up to 1.5 degrees centigrade up to 2100. If the emissions are minimal, and emissions for this need to be reduced quickly and extensively. Another RCP 4.5 and 6, if we analyze, It is somewhat, we can say, intermediate situation scenario where intermediate actions along with advanced mitigation measures need to be taken in order to reduce the global temperature rise. Otherwise, what will happen? If we're talking, because in previous RCPs we talked about the minimal scenario, here we are talking about the intermediate scenario where increase in the global temperature may take place by 2.5 degrees centigrade to 3 degrees centigrade by 2100. Just analyze RCP 85. If we analyze RCP 85, it means we are not taking any action, means a business as usual. We are talking about such scenario with high emissions. If more emissions increases, in which temperature increase may take place from 4 degrees centigrade by the year 2100, and this would have various serious and pervasive effects on the economy, society, ecosystem, biodiversity, etc. Actually, this IPCC works through several pathways, and among those pathways we have seen the representative concentration pathway, RCPs, and generally the RPCs focuses on the situation of future greenhouse gases, and by analyzing RCP 2.6 we have seen it is a minimal emission situation where the temperature may rise up to 1.5 degrees centigrade till 2100. RCP 4.56, it is somewhat, we can say, intermediate scenario where the situation of temperature, global temperature may further worsen and it may lead up to 2.5 to 3 degrees centigrade by 2100, and RCP 8.5 that focuses on business as usual with high emissions where at least 4 degrees centigrade temperature may rise by the year 2100. Many times it may also have some irreversible impacts. By analyzing all this, through all this assessment, IPCC even also works for climate change mitigation and adaptation. If such situation is continuing, if such situation may arise in future, then what should be the certain strategies to mitigate, to have adaptation regarding the climate change. So talking about some of the strategies which the IPCC has focused mostly, that is shifting or switching towards the renewable energy like wind, solar, means environment friendly energy. We are talking about shifting, and many of the nations have adopted that some of this much percentage of the energy should be received from the environment friendly energy resources. It also talks about improving the energy efficiency. It also talks about improving the carbon sequestration ecosystem, maybe the afforestation we may talk about, reforestation we may talk about, even we may talk about rejuvenating various water bodies, etc. IPCC also gives the strategy of carbon capture storage, which is one of the advanced strategy technology where carbon is not released directly in the atmosphere, but it is isolated from the industrial emissions at source, and it is captured and it is journeyed underground, means the emission towards the atmosphere is stopped. That is what we can say carbon capture storage technology, and it has been also adopted. If we are having the example, it has adopted by the several nations. Even transitional activities can be adopted for having sustainable practices of water conservation, sustainable practices for food and agricultural system, all. So it talks about various strategies for climate change mitigation and adaptation. But on the other hand, we are now observing the population which are already feeling the ill impacts of the climate change. For them, the adaptation measures becomes very much necessary, and this adaptation may include certain sustainable practices regarding the water management, the sustainable agricultural practices, even by having the early warning system forecast for the emergencies, and even by constructing the resilient infrastructure to large extent, we can reduce the ill impacts of the climate change. So, after knowing these all functionalities of the IPCC, let us talk how it is very much related with the global policy implications, how it is related with the several other organizations which is working on the climate change impacts. One important international agreement which was created in 1992 in order to address the climate change is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is UNFCCC, means United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is very much important international agreement which was generally established in 1992 in order to address the climate change. The main objective of UNFCCC is to stabilize the atmospheric concentration of the greenhouse gases by modifying the anthropogenic activities which are being regarded responsible for increase in the greenhouse gases. So, actually it focuses how to stabilize the atmospheric concentration of the greenhouse gases. So, the organizations, like if we talk about the Kyoto Protocol, if we talk about the Paris Agreement, you must have heard about this. These are the two important climate agreements that have resulted from UNFCCC, which serves as the cornerstone of international climate action. Means these Kyoto Protocol and Paris agreements that have generally resulted from the UNFCCC. So, how it is related with the Paris Agreement, IPCC, if we see that Paris Agreement which came in 2015 and various other even international climate agreements which came time to time intermittently, they are directly impacted by the evaluation of IPCC because they use the evaluation and assessment which are published through the several reports. These bodies use their evaluation in order to take certain decision, in order to make certain policies, in order to take certain climate action. So, as a result, we can say that IPCC's dire forecast pledges have been made to keep warming well below 2 degrees centigrade and to work towards keeping it to 1.5 degrees centigrade, what the first RCPs talked about. But whatever the situation is students, according to the recent estimates, if we find out the globe is not on track, not on the track that we are talking about, that we have to keep the focus of just maintaining the global rise in temperature up to 1.5 degree up to 2100. So, according to the recent estimates, I must say that the globe is not on track to achieve these objectives, thus necessitating a greater political will and action, and where you have to also take a greater responsibility in improving our environment. Save nature, it will save you. So that's all for today's lecture, students. Have a nice day. Thank you.